the Eagles secondary, and then we think of AJ Brown and Devontae Smith going against the 49ers corners. Which matchup do you think is going to be more interesting to watch? Maybe I can even ask you before getting into that, because I've just seen this debate online amongst fans. Do you think that Brandon Aiyuk is better than Devontae Smith? Because I've seen people kind of argue the opposite, and I'd just be interested in your perspective if you could talk about that a little bit before
I
maybe
think,
getting into the secondary.
yeah, I think when you talk about the debate between the two, you can see that they do similar things for their respective offenses. Um, I'll say this before I give my answer. I think Devontae Smith, when you look at it, has not gotten the opportunity that Brandon Ayuk
Yeah,
has gotten to be a number one receiver specifically in an offense. Ayuk is the number one receiver in San Francisco. Smith has firmly been entrenched as the number two for the majority, if not all, of his career in Philadelphia, behind a guy who commands significant volume in AJ Brown. You talk about AJ Brown, he had 1,500 yards last year, so it's tough, to get opportunities. I think Smith also, when you look at it, he's a guy who plays similarly. He has good route running, great route running, good speed, good contested catch capabilities. I would give Brandon Ayuk the slight edge because we've seen him. I think that when you talk about his capabilities alongside the size that Brandon Ayuk possesses, I think that allows him to be a little more durable. I also think that allows him to work a little better after the catch, which we've seen Brandon Ayuk do, especially when you talk about this season. I know there's a difference a little bit in the way that they're targeted, but Brandon Ayuk has been one of the best, if not the best, deep threats when you consider both statistics and volume this year. Brandon Ayuk, I think, is underrated. I think he is, considerably getting up there in that top 10 receiver conversation if he's not there already. And so I would give Brandon Ayuk the edge there.
really like that. I like that a lot. That's a good breakdown. I agree that I feel like it's maybe not a fair thing to be able to compare completely yet, because Devontae Smith is playing behind AJ Brown, so you haven't seen him face those same matchups. But I know that that was a little random, but I saw that conversation, and as a 49er fan, my instinct was to be like, "Oh, Ayuk is definitely better," but I saw some people making their case for Devontae Smith and was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'm not um, I don't watch every single Philly game, so maybe I'm not as pretty privy to them." So, but when we are talking about AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, let's maybe focus on AJ Brown for a second instead. Do you think that Travaris Ward, will follow him the way that he did DK Metcalf? Steve Wilkes was asked about Ward shadowing DK in the Seahawks game, and apparently having him shadow the number one receiver has been something that Ward actually went to Wilkes and asked about previously, and they just figured that that Seattle matchup was the first time that they wanted to implement that. But do you think going forward in this Eagles game, that'll be something they stick to as well?
I think that that's something you definitely look at, but when you look, I mean, when you consider why the 49ers signed Charvarius Ward, it was to get a cornerback number one, a top level cornerback that could shadow top level cornerback or receivers, because that's what top level cornerbacks do. I think that when you talk about Charvarius Ward, personally, I believe he's the most underrated player on the team. I think that I firmly believe that. I think that his contributions get overlooked because when you talk about a cornerback, they're usually being talked about if they're bad, right? If they're in the spotlight for the wrong reasons, or if they get interceptions. Ward isn't a guy who will necessarily get a ton of interceptions. One, he doesn't get many targets thrown his way in contested catch situations, and two, that's just not usually been his MO overall, even dating back to Kansas City. But he's a guy who, again, he doesn't get targeted that much because he has sticky coverage overall, and so that that leads to inaccurate throws, leads to not as many interception opportunities. I wouldn't be surprised if they go with that route. Having Ward tail AJ Brown. AJ Brown is similar size wise to DK Metcalf, but I also think it's a lot more of a difficult matchup, and I do think San Francisco has to worry about other things. I think when you look at DK Metcalf's route tree and the way the 49ers kind of countered that, I think that that's something that DK Metcalf's a receiver where if you have a strong cornerback, you're able to kind of cover him one on one. AJ Brown's a receiver with a variety of routes in his arsenal. I think he's also a guy who specializes with that go route with the contested catch, and so you could see one on one opportunities. I wonder though if it will be to the effect that you saw against DK Metcalf. I don't know if it'll be to that level in terms of the amount that you see it.
And you haven't really seen, and maybe this is just against the 49ers that he gets like this, but I feel like AJ Brown is able to kind of stay in the game a little bit more, where DK, you can rattle him and get in his head, and then he starts to maybe not play up to his potential because he can get a little bit mentally out of it.
Mhm.
Do you think that Ambry Thomas will have continue to have a good game? He's came out of nowhere and actually really had success. I think maybe last game might be his best game with that interception where he really like ran the route for the wide receiver when he caught that interception. Um, I was thinking his first game where he was put back in there and did well, I think a lot of people wondered, okay, is this a fluke? Is this because the 49ers had given him opportunities before to come in? But seems, I mean, only a couple games, but it seems like he's really stepped up. Now, obviously, the level of competition is going to be so much better. I'm kind of anticipating that there'll be a couple times that the Eagles win, but do you think that Ambry Thomas will be able to play decently? I'm not saying he's going to completely shut anyone down, but do you think that he'll, be a detriment in this game, or do you think he'll be able to stand on his own?
It's always tough to guess when it comes to cornerbacks how they'll end up playing. I think that, though, when you talk about the circumstances, you talk about severe rain, you talk about the way the 49ers have been playing defensively, you do feel a little more positive with Ambry Thomas and the way that he's played, especially. I think that there is room to be positive in this regard. And so I think that's a good sign. Again, this is a very difficult matchup. I'm talking about two upper echelon receivers in AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. Smith has good speed. Even their third guy, Quez Watkins, has good speed. You got good speed guys all across the board. That's something the 49ers can struggle with in the past. But I think it's truly how the 49ers kind of complement each other with the way that their cornerbacks can play. If they can take away those short distance situations, I think that you kind of limit Philadelphia's offense. That helps your pass defense overall, and that helps you get off the field. If you don't, you keep Philadelphia's complete arsenal in their playbook, and you keep that at hand. I think that that's something that San Francisco might have a little bit of a bigger issue facing. So I truly feel like it's kind of more of a team thing. How are the 49ers kind of going to try and combat, overall what Philadelphia does? Based on that, based on what we see, that's kind of how I think Ambry Thomas will play out.
I like that. Now, when switching over and looking at the other side, uh, Brandon Aiyuk will probably be going against Darius Slay, and then Deebo going against Bradbury, which I think will be interesting because Deebo did call James Bradbury trash last year and then didn't back down from that take, didn't necessarily reiterate it, but said, I think he said, I said what I said on the Kay Adams show. And James Bradbury had a few words for him as well, kind of encouraging Deebo to make sure that he can back up his previous talk. So I think that that'll be an interesting matchup. Do you see the 49ers skill position players able to kind of win against the Eagles corners a little bit in this game?
49ers skill position players, I think that, like I mentioned earlier, you try and exploit that linebacker matchup. You might see different variations. Deebo Samuel out of the backfield, potentially in a couple of packages. Christian McCaffrey could see higher volume, in his role. George Kittle could see higher volume in his role. But I also don't think the 49ers are going to change too much. Again, this is a game where something I've talked about the entire year is you want these games where Brock Purdy is tested. Brock Purdy is put into situations where he isn't supposed to be comfortable. You want to see how he responds because that's ultimately what he'll see in the playoffs. That's ultimately what you can essentially judge him off in terms of can he be that guy that leads you to the promised land. And so this is a game that I feel that it can be in that situation. Excuse me, especially if Philadelphia is able to get some, pressure on the quarterback and tighten some things up in coverage, which makes those throws a little harder. I think that when you talk about all of those kind of factors in general, I think that's something that will make it harder on Brock Purdy. So to me, I think truly how the 49ers skill position players are going to do is dependent on how the quarterback will play. I think that they'll be fine on their own, but this is a test for Brock Purdy. We'll see how he kind of responds to the test.
I like that a lot. Now, you did see Hassan Reddick come out and make some comments today. I didn't have a huge problem with that. I feel like if I was Hassan Reddick, I might feel a little bit, um, you know, uh, I'd give people the side eye a little bit because the 49ers players liked to talk about the previous matchup as if it was a fluke. And if I was Hassan Reddick, I might be like, "Hey, I did that. I get credit for that. Why are we pretending that that was, something that I wasn't able to do? Taking out the quarterback counts. That was a move that I made." Um, what did you think about the Eagles players kind of talking back this week? Because the 49ers players did not. Do you think, by the way, when it comes to that, do you think that Kyle Shanahan maybe told them not to? Because, I mean, everyone from Trent Williams to, I think, Taper Taper Pepper, the holder, Deebo, Aiyuk, everyone who's been asked about it. I mean, George Kittle was like, I don't even know why there's so many media people here. It's just another game. Like they were acting like it's just so weird that people are making this game up to be. I think I said earlier, it feels more like a playoff game, and the 49ers are really downplaying that. Uh, and the Eagles are not. So how do you feel about the talk that's been going back and forth?
I think that it kind of tells you, in a way, who wants it more too. I mentioned earlier, the Eagles don't need this game. I will make a hot take at the very end of the show on how this season ends up going but in my opinion, I don't think the Eagles need this game to get the 1 seed. And so when you look at the way that they're treating it more as, a fun game, more of like one of those like rivalry type of games. The 49ers, they might seem locked in because they absolutely need this game. I think if they don't win this game, their 1 seed hopes are crushed. So that's kind of the way that I look at it. I also think that you're definitely going to hear chirping during the game,
Oh
potentially
yeah,
pre-game, and definitely after the game, regardless of the result.
I do too. I think it's gonna be such a fun game. We're gonna go to the last segment.